Now we're going to take a look at the second sentence in this first paragraph, which is really two very tiny sentences sort of put together. It starts at sibi and goes all the way to est. Let's read the whole thing. Sibi dixit, illud donum ignis, quem Prometheus occupavit, causa huius mali est. Did you notice that we have the verb dixit, the verb occupavit, and the verb est in this sentence? That means that I have to have three separate clauses or units of thought. Dixit with the colon after it and then the quote immediately following it is easy for us to figure out, or makes it easy for us to figure out where that first clause ends and the second one begins. The next one is a little more convoluted because as I am reading the sentence, I notice the word quem, which is a relative pronoun. There is not a preposition in front of it, so quem is the start of a new idea. The relative clause begins with the relative pronoun and ends at the first verb, occupavit. And so what I have going on here is I have one idea, quem Prometheus occupavit, embedded within a second idea. When we talk about translating, we'll talk about how to put that all together. Sibi is the reflexive pronoun, sui sibi say. It is in the dative form, so I would translate it as either to himself or to themselves. That's going to depend on whether or not the subject is singular or plural. When I look at the verb that goes with the sibi, I see that it ends with the letter T. So I know that the subject must be a he, she, or it. We are still focused on Jupiter being the subject of this third person singular verb. Have you noticed that this verb form dixit has the letter X in it? X is indicative of a third principal part. When you look at the vocabulary list at the vocabulary word dico, dicere, dixi, dictum, to say or to speak, you clearly see that the dix is the base of the third principal part of that verb. That means that this verb is in the perfect tense. Now we enter into the quote. I want to talk about the relative clause first, because I want to be able to determine what word it needs to be connected to when I translate this part of the sentence into English. Remember that when you use a relative clause in English, you must place the translation of that relative clause immediately after the noun, which is the antecedent of the relative pronoun, because the proximity of the relative pronoun to the noun in English tells you what noun it is describing. To determine the antecedent, we need to know the gender and number of quem. Quem is masculine and it is singular. I have two nouns that come in front of it, donum and ignis. Ignis is the noun which is masculine. Donum is a neuter noun. So the relative clause quem Prometheus occupavit is describing ignis or fire. Notice that quem is in the accusative case, which means it's serving as the direct object of occupavit. But because it is referring to ignis, which is an object, not a person, instead of trying to decide whether I should translate it as who or whom, I'm just going to translate it as which. I have to make sure to put that which immediately after the word fire when I use it. Prometheus is the subject of the relative clause because it's in the nominative case. And then I see occupavit. Notice the V in occupavit. Again, V is a letter that is characteristic of a third principal part of a verb. And if you go to the vocabulary list, you see the entry occupo, occupara, occupavi, occupatum. Notice the V in the third principal part. Once again, that means that this verb is in the perfect tense, with he, she, or it as the subject, and of course Prometheus is in the nominative case, so it's the subject of the verb occupavit. So to translate just the relative clause, I would write which Prometheus seized. That has to be placed right next to the word fire. Now, how am I going to use fire in the clause that it is in? The clause that the word fire is in is illud donum ignis causa huius mali est. I notice that I have est, which is in the present tense, because the est does not start with an era or an eri, so it is the present tense form of to be. That tells me that I have a sentence that has a subject and a predicate noun. So I should be able to find two nominative case nouns in this sentence. Donum, although it looks accusative, can also be nominative because, as we mentioned earlier, it is a neuter case noun. And I also have causa, which is in the nominative case. I know it's nominative and not ablative because there is no preposition in front of it. Therefore, when I translate this sentence, I can put donum in front of est and causa after est. So if ignis is not being the subject, what is it doing? If you look at the vocabulary list, the word ignis, fire, is not only the nominative form, but also the genitive form. And that's how we're using it here. Gift of fire. Illud is the demonstrative pronoun illa, illud. It is in the neuter, nominative, and accusative form, so it is serving as an adjective to describe gift. So illud donum ignis all works together to make the subject. Remember that because ignis is in the genitive case, you can put the word of in front of it. I think that's how it will make the best sense in this sentence. Then you would go to est, because after you have a subject, you need a verb. And then after the verb, we're going to put our other nominative case noun, causa, is the cause. Now, usually when we say that something is the cause, we want to know the cause of what. And if I look at both huius and mali in this sentence, I notice that huius is definitely in the genitive case, and mali has the ability to be in the genitive case when it is masculine and singular. We are noticing here that malum, which is generally thought of as an adjective, is actually being used like a noun in this sentence, evil. Makes perfect sense, right, to use evil as a noun rather than as an adjective. And for that reason, we're going to write it in the genitive case, huius mali. Huius is simply describing mali. It's being used as a demonstrative adjective. And you're going to place the word of in front of that phrase. So we begin the sentence by saying dixit sibi. We start with dixit because it gives you your pronoun subject and verb, and then sibi is the dative case. Remember, you can translate it as himself with the dixit referring to Jupiter. Then what did he say? Illud donum ignis. And then you have to work in your relative clause, quem Prometheus occupavit. Then you have to finish the clause that began with illum donum ignis by going to est causa huius. Did you get that? Let's see how well you do at putting together the translation.